My work is very emotional, very psychological, and very gestural. And so I was like, oh my God, here I am. I can control where the eye is going, where the audience's eye is going. And it just seemed like the right fit. And pretty much, I mean, it sounds a little silly now, but it was like right then and there, I was like, I'm never doing a live show again.
She is a choreographer turned award-winning filmmaker who has amassed a body of deeply moving, socially conscious work.
We are thrilled to chat with Gabrielle Lansner today.
My name is Nancy Magarill. I'm a singer, songwriter, composer, performer, graphic and web designer.
And I'm Peter Michael Marino, and I'm a writer, producer, creator, performer, and educator.
We are New York-based artists you may or may not have heard of.
And we are here to introduce you to other artists you may or may not have heard of.
When my son gotta go out there and put his life on the line to protect his own kind, I am not okay. I am not okay. When my son gotta call me and tell me NYPD was starting trouble and doing things to people, I am not okay. How do you sleep? How do anyone sleep knowing that lives are being taken because of their skin color? If I could write this shit in fire, I will write this shit in fire.
That was an excerpt from I Am Not Okay, a film by Gabrielle Lansner, who is joining us today. Gab, let's start by talking about how this film developed.
The genesis of it was at the end of May in 2020 during COVID. It was right after George Floyd was killed, and there were a lot of protests going on, and there were protests in downtown Brooklyn. And maybe it was the next day, I was looking at Facebook, and my friend Tiffiney Davis, who runs the Red Hook Art Project in Red Hook, Brooklyn, had posted a Facebook Live post. She was in her kitchen, and she was speaking to her phone and to her community, to whoever who was going to watch. And it was a sermon, it was a rant, it was a plea. It was about her fears for her son actually being at the protest, and then generally about growing up Black in America and growing up Black male in America. And she ran the gamut of emotions. She talked about anger and fear and love, and how communities and her community needed to come together to move through this, and asking, what do we do and how do we prevent, and move through all this, the racism that exists. And it just really hit me very strongly, because I know her, and just because it was so true and potent.
Yeah.
So when I heard it, I thought about, since it was COVID and I was isolated, and I had made a piece about the South African Truth and Reconciliation Commission almost 15 years ago in 2000. Now it's 20 years ago.
I remember that piece. I was bawling my eyes out when I saw that. It was so beautiful.
And that piece too focused on a lot of South African mothers who had lost their children during apartheid. And I just thought, oh, what if I put her words on top of some of the choreography I had made? And I had a little video clip on my computer, and so I messed around with that, and I thought, wow, this is very powerful, and maybe I can do something with this during COVID. So I thought about it. The first thing I did was call Tiffiney to say, I'm possibly thinking about doing this thing, a film, and can I use your words? And she said, absolutely. So that was the beginning of it. And then a few months later, I reached out to a performer named Pat Hall, who I've collaborated with, who was also in this piece called Salt Chocolate, which was the piece about South Africa. And I decided to make a dance duet between a mother figure and a son, and use Tiffiney's words. And then my sister Erica Lansner is a freelance photographer, photojournalist, and she had been going to all the protests. And so I asked her if she could send me images that I could use, that I could fold into the narrative of what I was making. So that's how it began. And then I also reached out to the composer Philip Hamilton, who who I'd also done many collaborations with, and he was on board. And we got into the studio during COVID with our masks. I had to audition Dasir Housif, who plays the son. I had to, I had to have auditions with masks, and then like, well, maybe take your mask off for 2 seconds so I can see you, and I'll stand back. But we had many rehearsals with masks on, and then finally things eased up a little bit.
You knew that you were creating this project to be a film.
Yeah, absolutely.
Right,
Yeah.
especially during COVID. Nobody was thinking about live performances at that time.
No, and I actually stopped doing live performances completely in 2009. So I've just been making my work, my dance theater work, just for film.
What sparked that change?
It was a little by accident. I was going to do a project with a friend of mine who was a sculptor who had a 7,000 square foot studio space in upstate New York. And we talked about doing a film with dance with his kinetic. He had been making these kinetic sculptures. So we talked about that. So I gathered a group of dancers together and we made a lot of material. And then somewhere along the line, I just sort of thought, oh, I'm not quite sure if this is going to work with his work right now. And he was very generous and he said, oh, just go ahead, use my studio if you want to shoot in it. And he recommended a camera person. And so it was sort of like my first, foray in, well, not quite my first, but I had a 2-day shoot. And when I got behind the camera, I realized that my work is very emotional, very psychological, and very gestural. And so I was like, oh my God, here I am. I can control where the eye is going, where the audience's eye is going. And it just seemed like the right fit. And pretty much, I mean, it sounds a little silly now, but it was like right then and there, I was like, I'm never doing a live show again.
Amazing.
And I didn't.
Oh my gosh.
Not yet.
I love when the muse does that, right?
Yeah.
We can't always rely on it to like bring us inspiration, but it is nice when it's like, no, stop.
Yeah, it's like when this is what you have to do. It's almost like I'm put here to do this.
I don't know if it was quite, I don't know if
that
it's
dramatic.
quite that, but there's so many layers of, as producing work in New York City and getting an audience, and it can be exhausting and expensive. And I was just like, wait a minute, maybe I should just try this. And I did.
You mentioned your collaborator, and some young theater person was asking me advice just last night about like, how do you find the right collaborators? And I'm like, it just takes forever. Just know that it takes forever, and then you won't question, why is it not happening? How does that resonate with you?
I guess I've been lucky. It's just it seems like it's all sort of happened in an organic way. Where I've met somebody and then I'm like, oh, hey, you want to work on this? And then I end up working with someone for 20 years.
Right.
Pat Hall had come to see one of my earliest works in like 2020. And she actually came to me and said, I want to work with you.
Who is Pat Hall?
Pat Hall is the female dancer performer in the film, and she is an educator. She's a performer. She also has been teaching an amazing Afro-Caribbean dance and movement class for over 30-ish years.
Yeah.
So I first met Pat in 1986 because I went to the class for a couple of months. And then in 2020, I was making a piece called Frankie's Wedding, and one of my performers said to me, well, this is my rehearsal availability. And for the most part, I absolutely cannot rehearse on Saturdays unless it's like tech or absolutely necessary because I go to a dance class with Pat Hall. And I was like, oh my God, Pat Hall. So after we finished that production, I started going to her class. But she came to see this piece. And so we talked about our desires to work together. And then the time came that it was like, oh, I'm doing this piece about South Africa. And then also the composer for that. Oh, no, while maybe I was rehearsing that work at these studios on 42nd Street. And next door to me, Philip Hamilton, who was the composer for I Am Not Okay, was next door. And I was having trouble like hearing and counting some music one day. And I was like, Philip, could you just come over here and help us with this? So that's how I met Philip. And then I started following his work and going to hear his work. And so then the next year, well, anyway, when the time came, we started working together.
Was that before the Tina Turner piece?
No, that was before, but the Tina Turner piece was the first time I worked with Philip.
Are you shooting the whole thing from different angles, or are you, oh, this segment I'm shooting this way, this segment I'm setting up this way? What's that process like?
So yes, we do sort of storyboard the entire piece and decide, okay, yes, we're shooting from this angle and this angle and this part of the room. And so that's all choreographed before we start shooting.
And
Yeah.
who's we in shooting?
Well, with the director of photography, and in this film we had a Steadicam operator. So I'm talking to Barbie about what I want and the Steadicam, and then she's communicating to the Steadicam what to do. And then I also know when I want to have close-ups, and sometimes I want to just see a hand, sometimes I just want to see a face. We did some work from way above because we were in this huge loft party space in Greenpoint called Serret Studios. And so that's all planned out.
You're choreographing the camera moves as well. It's all like this great dance captured on film. Yeah, because I think a lot of folks might think, oh, it's a film of a dance.
No,
and not that like the dance is like actually the medium that the story is being told through in a cinematic fashion.
Well, that and the text, right? And
the spoken word, of
course. Yeah, the spoken word, and then we shoot everything, and then we made a segment of dance material that was about 10 minutes long, and we just figured out what the shots were. But then when I start editing, it's not like I'm editing A, B, C, D, E. It's X, Y, B, C, 2, 1, 3, 5, 6.
It's sort of like just putting it all together and
seeing what it's re-choreographing, and it's and I like the process a lot.
Yeah. Do you get into one of those? Nancy, you probably do too, right? Editing this, you get into that sort of like editing hole. You just go down this, and suddenly you're like, I forgot to have lunch.
Right?
What? How? What?
This is a little different with a podcast because it's very linear, and you want to keep the conversations going. Whereas I think what Gabrielle's talking about is you're really open to anything. You can put anything anywhere as long as it tells the story and helps move it along, which I think is really exciting because you probably shoot a ton of footage that you can't use.
Exactly. Or don't use. Yes.
Or don't use.
Exactly.
Right.
Yeah.
Let me ask you a question though. Like, what gave you the confidence that you felt after never having done any film work that you could actually put films together? Where did that come from? Just a desire to do it?
I guess just the desire to do it. I mean, I have to say the very first thing I did.
What was the name of that?
Well, you might never have seen it actually. Oh. I think I called it Dreaming in Tears. And the very first thing I didn't see the light of day at all, but I was...
It's a great title, by the way, for a piece.
Thank you. But I did decide that I wanted to edit it into something. And I worked with an editor, and I was just determined, like, I am making something with this material. And I'm trying to think, maybe that is Dreaming in Tears, which never really went anywhere. I don't even know if I submitted it to festivals, but there was also some issues with the quality of the camera work. So I decided I wanted to reshoot a lot of it and then work with a different director of photography. So I actually went back a year later and in a different space and reshot it. And then it was sort of this long thing. It was about 20 minutes long, different stories. And a couple people said to me, this isn't working. And one person said to me, maybe you should pull out the separate stories. So I listened to her, and I guess out of that came a short, more just abstract dance piece called Wishing. And then also Dad, which was Paula McGonigal was in it. It was a solo. So I took out 2 sections from this larger work. I don't know. I think it's also, I was fortunate to meet and hire people because I don't do the camera work myself. And I, found people that I could communicate with and collaborate with. And I don't even know if I thought about it. I just was like, oh, I'm doing it.
Yeah.
And then, things got a little bit more, sophisticated, with also just technically. And one of my films we shot out of town, and that was sort of a huge project, which I don't think I realized, when my producer was like, Gabrielle, you don't realize,
So much logistics.
Yeah,
So
yeah.
much.
What is your crew like when you're filming a movie? Like, what do you feel like you need to have as a crew?
Just that everybody is on board and working and having a good time. And
But I mean, what
would-
kind of pieces do you have? Like, do you have a cinematographer or director of photography? What is the team that works best for you when you're filming?
well, I have a DP, the camera person, the gaffers, the assistant gaffer, a sound person.
Can I ask
it's
a question? What is a
yes.
gaffer?
They take care of the electrical issues, and I'm not even 100% sure to tell.
A wardrobe person,
Yeah, so
makeup, hair, makeup.
hair and makeup, sound, a wardrobe person if we needed. On this one, I actually did the costumes, and it was only 2 of them. But yeah, I did one of my films, The Birch Grove, which was done in 2015. We did it out of town, so we the producer had to find lodging, and it was a whole thing, catering, and
Right. And
Yeah.
of course, you have a set designer.
and a set designer, an in-house set designer, my husband, Dean Tauscher.
Aha.
It's not so
Yes.
shabby.
No.
Yeah, he did the set. He did the original set for Sopranos, and then he did Law and Order for.
Law and Order Special Victims Unit for 21 seasons as the production designer.
That's
Yeah.
amazing.
Yeah.
Wow.
It's pretty amazing.
When did the word choreographer first enter your,
Lexicon?
Your lexicon? How old were you? Where were you? How'd this happen?
Probably in high school.
Mm.
I mean, I've been dancing since I was 10. And then in high school, I guess I was doing some choreography workshops with Pearl Lang, who was a modern dancer who came out of the Martha Graham Company. And, for I don't know why.
That sounds amazing.
Yeah.
Yes, no, I've had amazing.
Like, you don't even realize until many years later, like, oh my God.
No. It was, yes. I mean,
it's so crazy that you'd had that experience.
I started taking dance classes at Juilliard Preparatory when I was in 5th grade. And I think one of the reasons I went there because we had a family friend named Pat Birch who
Sure.
went on to, is a, wonderful, wonderful Broadway choreographer and
The
director.
movie Hair.
Yes. Yeah.
Am I right? The movie Hair?
No, I think
Grease.
Grease. Absolutely.
Good going, Pete.
That's all right.
Yeah. So I
Twyla
started.
Tharp is Hair. Sorry.
Yeah.
Pat Birch, I think Leader of the Pack, maybe also on Broadway.
Was there? Oh, I don't.
I don't know. We'll have to.
Well,
look
that's
it
a
up.
song. That's not a song?
No, there was a
No, there
musical
was a
called Leader of
musical.
the Pack
Really?
that
I
used
don't
all
know.
of that. It was very much in the world of Grease,
Yeah.
so I think maybe. So you knew what a choreographer was at an early age
Oh,
already.
absolutely.
Yeah.
I mean, for high school, I don't know why. Anyway, but I did a senior dance project, and I choreographed a couple solos and duets.
Well, you have
Yeah.
a pretty artistic family. Your mother was
Yes.
an artist. Your father was an editor, right?
Yes.
So her father was the editor of Newsweek.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So you were surrounded by a lot of art. Sounds like you and Erica basically got a lot. I mean, when her mother passed away, I was at their house, and the house was full of art that she had done. And it was unbelievable to see this, like being surrounded by that as a child. I can't imagine that wouldn't affect you in some way.
Oh my
and sort of
gosh.
inspire you. And she was a wonderful artist.
Yes.
Yeah. So you started choreographing in school, and then did you always know you were like that? This is what I want to do, or were you thinking of you would do something else?
No, I always knew that it was what I wanted to do. At some point during college, I did a summer workshop with some experimental theater companies, and when I did that, I was like, "Oh, I don't want to dance anymore. I want to do experimental."
Yeah, of course you did.
Yeah. So I actually I was at Purchase College in the dance department, and then I transferred to NYU. Has an experimental theater wing.
Of
So
course they do.
I transferred there,
Yes.
and we just did workshops with different, and it was the heyday of experimental theater.
Yeah.
And my first group of teachers, then it was Spalding Gray and the performance group,
Oh my
or the
God,
performing at the
really?
performing garage.
Cool.
And I just went up to them and said, I want to work with you. So I became their stage manager while I was in college,
Smart.
and then ended up working with them for 2 or 3 years after I left school.
And then what?
And then I think I just started going back to some dance classes, and I met a choreographer named Charlie Moulton who was making work. And my hope was that I could perform with the performing garage, and that really wasn't happening. They basically had one female performer. And so I started going back to dance class, which I can't remember if I stopped completely, but I started going back to the Cunningham studio, and then I started working with Charlie Moulton. And then I guess Charlie, I don't know how it initially happened. So before PS 122, for the Performance Space 122 became PS 122, Charlie Moulton, myself, Tim Miller, Peter Rose, and John Byrne, who I guess both Peter Rose and John Byrne are no longer here, were using the space. I don't remember if we even paid money, but it was part of a community center. Keith Haring was in the building.
Wow.
There were 20 artists, and there was an
God.
huge old auditorium room. We scraped that floor, and I and Charlie and Tim Miller and the rest of us, we were the first ones in PS 122, and I was going to community. We had community meetings to go to, and they started doing different performance events, Avant-Garde-Rama. Charles Dennis, who ran Avant-Garde-Rama. So yes, and I started choreographing again. So yeah, that was sort of the beginning of me choreographing in New York.
You're making me so nostalgic. Like
Yes.
I'm actually like I feel my shoulders like sinking down to the ground. I'm suddenly just like, I need to go to Canal Jeans. I'm so
Pearl
down
paint.
there. I'm so
Pearl
down there
paint,
right
right?
now. My
Yeah.
gosh, it's just like how amazing. I want to see the movie of what you just described.
Right?
Like, I want to be there. 'Cause I think I got into it like, I came to New York in like 87. So like, I think I got like just the tail end of that awesomeness that was happening,
Yeah. I came in 85,
Mhm.
and January 2nd, 85, and I had a little bit of it too, but it definitely started changing pretty soon after. But that was a different time in New York. Like, how cool that you grew up. Did you live on the Upper West Side?
Yeah,
Yeah.
80th Street, yeah.
Yeah. But it was a very different time in New York. It was like the beginning of, that was when PBS was starting, when all this stuff. But I think it's fascinating that there was a company called Avant-Garde-Rama, but it's just such a weird name for avant-garde anything, right? Avant-Garde-Rama. It seems like
Yeah.
right now it would be a show.
Mhm.
So it's,
Yeah, it was also around the same time as like there was a place called Danceteria.
That's true.
It just felt like I think there was even a gasateria, or maybe I think there still is a gasateria in Astoria.
I've never heard
I
of
can't
that.
believe I know this.
And I don't know if that doesn't sound so great, gasateria. As an older woman, that's like a little like.
Oh, I think
Brings
it's
up
for
different-
automobiles.
Yes. Gas station.
It's a gas station. Do you know there are people who have never pumped gas? Has anybody here never pumped gas?
Oh no, I grew up pumping.
Well, 20 years ago, my niece's cousins who were 8 didn't know what a match was.
Whoa.
Wait, how did they find out? That's what I want to know.
I said something about lighting a match, and they were like, "What?" Or like, we don't use a match," or I think it was like, "What?" And it was like, "We have the clicker."
A lighter?
Clicker. Yeah, like
a
one of those
lighter.
Bic lighters,
Yeah.
probably.
Yeah, yeah.
Oh
I
my
actually have
gosh.
one. I found one on the floor out in the hallway the other day. So I actually have a Bic lighter in my apartment now, which I'm like, oh, this is great. But yeah, I have matches. I don't know how anybody doesn't have matches.
They're also,
but that's
you see
weird.
them used in movies and television and
Yeah.
books. Like they've been referenced in
Cigarettes.
other ways,
Yeah.
right? At the event I was at last night, it's like a drawing for independent theater companies, and everybody goes to this thing every year, and they raise lots of money, and each company gets like $1,000 to just pay their they're artists. It's fucking great.
That is great.
And I never get it. I met someone who
What
wins.
is it called?
It's Indie Space is the organization that puts this event together every year called the Big Give. And it was at Chelsea Factory. Great venues. It was just awesome. Anyway, so they have these buckets that they reach their hands into to pull out the names of these, 300 theater companies. There's like 100 people are going to win this thing. So everyone's just like, please let it be me. Oh, my friend won it. Yay. Come on. Anyway, they have this one bucket that is for companies that have been putting their name in for over 10 years and have never won.
Wow.
And the name of that bucket, as they're very equitable. I mean, it's ridiculous how equitable this organization is. The name of that bucket was the Susan Lucci bucket.
Oh my God,
right?
That's hysterical.
So clever, right?
Yes.
So the host of it, I mean, the woman who put it together, Randy Berry, gets up there and she's announcing all the things. She goes, the Susan Lucci bucket. And I just realized most of the people in this room don't even know who Susan Lucci is. Can you please raise your hand if you know who Susan? And she was totally right because, there's us old people who have been doing indie theater in New York since the beginning of time. And then there's also new people. And those new people really should not know who Susan Lucci is. I didn't get all like, if you want to be in the arts, you have to know your history.
Yeah.
Susan Lucci is arts history.
She's arts and New York history.
Well, she is New York history.
Yeah.
Correct.
It is kind of amazing that we grew up on soap operas and they're almost non-existent now. Like all of us watched that and it was just, that was all that was on in the afternoon, right? That's
everybody really cared about these two characters named Luke and Laura getting married.
Right.
That's amazing, the power of storytelling, though, in a way, isn't it? That really everybody actually cares enough to watch their marriage.
Yeah.
On TV, thinking it's live probably too.
Yeah. So Gabrielle, let's talk about how you got I Am Not Okay into festivals.
Yes.
So I want to swing back to I Am Not Okay because it's playing in at the Brooklyn Museum until January 26th, right?
Yeah, it's at the Brooklyn Museum and the Brooklyn Artists Exhibition, and it's in honor of the museum's 200th anniversary. And the film there are over 200 artists in the show, and they've also built out a small video room, so there are 7 or 8 other video artists.
So
and
cool.
The film is on a loop and plays at 11:30, 12:30 throughout the day until about 6 o'clock. Yeah.
That's wonderful. And how did you get into that festival?
They had an open call and I saw that online or on Instagram and I sent my film in.
Oh my gosh, this is great.
I mean, it's such a perfect time for this film. I can't even imagine that. First of all, I think it should be shown everywhere. I know we were talking about potentially aiming to take it to schools. And the last time we spoke about that, what has there been any traction on that?
Well, we're actually going to be at Fordham University on January 22nd. We're going to screen the film, and then Pat is going to do a dance and percussion workshop as well. Yeah.
Wait, does she teach percussion as well?
Well,
or is Philip going to be there with her?
No. We have a drummer in class named Pam Patrick, so they will both be there and teach a workshop.
Back to collaborating with Pat and collaborating with the other dancers in the piece. How does that work? How do you start devising? There's that word, devising your pieces.
With this one, we began by listening to Tiffany's words a lot. And I mean, listening to the recording and being in the room together. And then I have each performer write down verbs, very active verbs about how they're feeling, about what they're hearing. In this case, about what they're hearing and the subject matter. So they write down a list of verbs like to love, to fear, to hate, to despise, to choke, to frustrate, and then they do a lot of improvisation in the room around these verbs, making short phrases and gestural phrases. And then I look at them, we look at them all together, and sometimes we learn each other's phrases. I'm doing most of the watching and the directing. And so a movement vocabulary is developed out of these verbs. In many of my other pieces, I've been adapting short stories and plays, so there's character development that happens in the same way. We also, so that was sort of the beginning of that. At some point, I know Tiffiney came to rehearsal a couple of times just for us to discuss the material and how we were feeling. Yeah, so that's sort of the beginning of the choreography.
So when you say that you devise a language, basically, is it really that you all understand it through movement, or do you ever call it? Do you have like call it by name, or is it just more of like the anger movement, or how do you communicate with each other that that's what you want for this piece or whatever?
Well, we're working with, so someone makes a phrase or a bunch of gestures around to choke or to love. So that's how these elements are named, and then I put them together. Sort of put them together. Yeah.
So you're really working with their physicality.
Oh, completely.
And their character work, how they dance, how they move, and incorporate that. And then you can devise the story that for Tiffiney's piece, obviously, that tells the story through all those different movements.
I am not participating in creating movement, and I'm not telling them to do this, or, I'm gesturing here with my hands. And I have not, for all the pieces pretty much all the pieces I've made, everything is coming out of the performers.
Wow.
Yeah. And they get credit. So I don't, say,
course.
I'm the choreographer.
Right. Yeah. Nancy, we have that word devising has come up a few times. And I think Gabrielle put it that's a really good way to look at it. There's still a director. There's still someone who's guiding the ship of ideas,
Oh, absolutely.
Yeah.
I mean, I am the Uber boss.
Yeah.
Yes.
But you have to go into a situation like that as an artist very open. You have to be very open to, to look bad, actually, right? To check yourself constantly, right? Because you're contributing, and maybe I'm contributing too much or too little. I mean, it's a very vulnerable place to be, and it's so lucky. You're always fortunate when you find collaborators who, let's say, I have this idea, let's just vomit it out and see what happens, and no one feels stupid,
And they're trusting. You have to build a layer of trust because otherwise, because people are taking a lot of time to do this, right? And they're,
Yes, and the material is very sensitive and triggering, and so there is and was a lot of just trust and honesty and support for everybody.
And I also think it's interesting that Uber boss, you're a white woman, and all of your team, basically with the exception of Dean, I guess, are not, right? Which is really interesting. And the shooting crew was diverse also, but yes. Yeah. So you're molding a story about their lives, which is very interesting. What makes you so empathic about, because all the work that I've seen you do is very politically, maybe political is not the right word, but it's it's very socially driven, and very much about change and pointing out so much of what has gone on historically. You've dealt with the Holocaust, you've dealt with apartheid, you dealt with Tina Turner, which is not as socially conscious. But you really gravitate towards that kind of work. Where does that come from?
I don't know. I think it's just what it's
what you know.
It's just it's just what I've done and what I've been drawn to, and the relationships and the different people I've met. And
do you think that if someone asked you to direct a Broadway musical, you would want to do it, or a big Broadway musical movie? Would that be something that would even appeal to you?
Possibly, yeah.
I did not expect that.
Me either. So you're open to anything.
I might have a lot of self-doubt about my ability to do it.
Well,
doesn't mean you don't want to do it.
Right. So it's really that this is what you gravitate towards, but you're open to doing it. I mean, look, the way that we met was we did a 10-minute musical, and it's not a socially conscious musical at all, although kind of had a heart.
But not all my, I don't know, some of the film work have been about relationships and life and death. And
yeah, but it always has a weight to it. It's not, you don't do fluff.
No.
Yeah. You're not a fluff director or choreographer or creator,
We're going to see your movie on the road.
Great.
That's where we're going to see your movie, right? It's going to be playing all over at festivals because you're using
Well, it's
Film
been
Freeway
in festivals for over 2.5 years. So yeah.
Well, we're going to make a date to go out to the Brooklyn
Yes,
Museum to
okay.
see it. Maybe you should come with us, Pete.
that I will
If
do.
you can. Yeah.
Yes.
It would be really nice. All right, we'll see you there.
Okay, great.
Hey, thanks for checking us out. Links to today's guest can be found in the show notes.
Don't forget to subscribe, like us, rate us, and tell all your friends about arts and craft.